What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Core Consult RX podcast that is just rocketing towards 200 episodes.
Oof.
We're going to just give the official countdown now over the next year.
You're going to hear it every day for the next year.
So get ready for that.
Because to us, it happens quickly. Actually, it probably happens faster to the podcast world than it does to us.
Maybe.
Because, and if they're probably listening to this like a year from now.
Right.
And they're listening to them one a day, one every couple of days. So they hear the countdown over the course of a month.
I think you are strongly overestimating how often people listen.
Okay, well, I'm thinking about how I listen to podcasts, which is never live.
But you listen to good podcasts.
Well,
that's the difference.
I never listen to a podcast like the day it comes out. I'm always, because I go back, if I like a podcast, I go back to the beginning, and I want to catch all the way up. So, like, stuff you should know, they're getting a shout out. I started back in 2008, or I went all the way back to 2008 episodes, and now I'm in 2019.
Nice.
So I've never listened to a live episode or one that just came out.
Well, there you go. Maybe. And I mean, who knows? People who watch us for the first time, or listen to us rather,
they can watch us.
They can watch us.
Nobody does, but they can
follow and subscribe to YouTube. But the ones who listen to us for the first time on episode 200. It's instantaneous for them.
That is true.
So, there you go.
So, they won't even have to hear the countdown. But then maybe they listen to 200, it gets them hooked, and they have to go back and start from the beginning, and then a year from then, they hear the countdown.
Maybe. It's a theory. It's probably wrong, but...
Hypothesis.
Maybe.
No, it's
we'll
not.
See.
It's a theory.
Is it? I don't know. Everyone that was listening ahead of time now is lost, and they're like, okay, turning this on to a better podcast. AJ, what's good, buddy?
Grand Rising.
What?
Good evening.
Oh, okay. Right on. AJ's using new terms, apparently. Our executive producer, AJ, in the house, as usual. So, AJ, what are we talking about today?
Tirzepatide, a dual GIP-GLP-1 receptor agonist.
For those of you who have not seen Tirzepatide, what are you doing?
First of all.
Second of all...
It's something else, huh?
It could be the game changer, I would say, for type 2 diabetes. I thought it was GLP-1s by themselves.
Well, GLP-1s were a game changer.
They are.
But they are a game changer.
However, the GLP-1 GIP receptor analog could be much more of a game changer.
I mean, we've had a wave of new drugs with the GLP-1s, oral and injectable, over the last, 5 years? 6 years? I predict another wave.
I think this one...
That's going to start with this.
Even if this is the only wave.
Even if this is the only one, right. But just think about how novel the first GLP-1s were, which I guess they go back all the way to
I mean, Byetta has been around for a minute.
Right, but the good ones were
the non-garbage ones.
Good ones, right. I mean, after this comes out and it's really good, hopefully they're just going to make better ones.
I'm sure they got some in the pipeline.
I'm sure they do.
Novo Nordisk is probably so mad right now.
I tell you what. So this is Lilly, which as we get into the data, it's interesting. I think they have a trial that's putting it up against Trulicity.
I think that was one of the initial ones. And then it went against Ozempic after that.
Yeah. So they put it up, and we'll go through all the stuff, but they put it up against some heavy hitters, which is what we're always asking for with trials with drugs and diabetes, especially the new ones.
So good on Lilly for actually taking the chance, and
I tell you what.
It's good for them.
And they've gotten some good results. They must have been confident, right? So if they weren't, they wouldn't have done it.
Maybe.
But they knew they had something going on.
Got to be confident. It's key.
Yeah.
So the other thing I'm really excited about is the device. I mean, it's.
I haven't seen it.
So most likely it's the Trulicity device.
Oh yeah.
So same like they did with Taltz, where they just had a little bit bigger version of it.
That's true because all their devices look like that. Emgality.
They own that device, that proprietary
everybody
device.
Likes it.
They do, yeah. So I love that Trulicity pen for patients. My patient, I've never had a patient complain about that one.
I'm glad that we can buzz market without risk of I don't know.
But yeah,
we can just say whatever we want about.
Of course.
Yeah, I just think about CE talks that I've given and stuff, and you have to be careful about stuff. But
not here.
When it's not a CE, we can talk about whoever we want.
Throw caution to the wind
and hope that they give us some money someday.
Well, probably not. We'll see.
They haven't yet.
But that's the thing is I feel like we should be getting sponsored by Lilly based on all the positive things we say. But unfortunately for us, it's
the problem is if something better comes along, then we'll just drop them.
I'll turn you into Prevnar 13 and just make fun of you constantly. So, anyways, without further ado, AJ, how did you start getting in? Because I know you've been talking about this and ranting and raving for it for about a month now, or maybe longer. What got you interested in this med.
Deep into diabetes research, we're seeing an increase in the importance of hormones and glucose regulation in the body. And so this is kind of just a solely hormonal drug that is being used for the treatment of type 2 diabetes, and it's novel, honestly.
Yeah. So for those of you who are not familiar with, GIP and what that is, it's one of the two main, incretins or incretins, depending on how you want to pronounce it, that we think about. And an incretin is the incretin effect is basically the idea that giving glucose orally will stimulate a better insulin response from the body than it would be if you gave glucose intravenously, and it's because of the release of GIP and GLP-1 in the intestinal tract and their downstream effects on the beta cells in the pancreas to release that insulin. And so GIP is the side of things that we haven't really explored yet, the medical clinician world has not explored because we haven't had any available products. But Tirzepatide is going to use both GIP and GLP-1 and use both sides of the incretin world in order to facilitate a better response than we've had previously, based on the data anyway.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And for those who are very familiar with the incretin effect and have heard of GIP, you might be saying, I thought that it had a different name. Well, turns out, for some nonsense reason, it's known as by two different names, actually three different names. Mm-hmm. So gastric inhibitory polypeptide, gastric inhibitory peptide, or glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide.
That's
all of those are GIP. They're all abbreviated as GIP as well. So I think if you look at some of the trials and maybe even like Lilly's website and stuff, they like the long form one. I think it just makes it sound more official, but it's the glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide. But all of those, I feel like the one I had heard was gastric inhibitory peptide, but all of them are the same.
And so it's definitely for what it lacks in FDA-approved products, it makes up for in letters in the name. Yeah. But this is a drug I definitely think will be approved this year. I wouldn't be surprised if not sooner than later. But I guess we'll kind of start off just talking about some of the background biochem physiological effects that GIP have, and we've gone over GLP-1 many times on this podcast. So GIP, I don't think we've ever even really mentioned.
I've heard you say it.
Okay.
So somewhere when you were probably talking about a GLP-1, you were talking about GIP.
Perfect. Right on. So this is just to recap GLP-1s. If you think about its effect on the pancreas, we're going to get an increased release of insulin, and that's after you've had a meal involving carbohydrates. You're going to get an increase in a decrease in glucagon secretion from the pancreatic alpha cells, because once we start secreting insulin, if glucagon levels then go up to kind of counteract that and create that homeostatic balance, we offset some of the effects of the insulin, and someone with diabetes, we don't want that. So we want to suppress glucagon if possible. And also, it can help with beta cell proliferation and hopefully increasing the available healthy cells that are able to produce said insulin in the first place. And then we know its effect as far as gastric emptying, where it slows that down, the ability to kind of break down those carbohydrates, and hopefully not the blood sugar is basically more of a rolling hill than a sharp spike. And then it also can decrease appetite through not only the gastric emptying process, but also through its effects on the actual feeling of hunger, where GLP-1 receptors binding in the hypothalamus can increase the activity of pro-opioid melanocortin neurons firing. AJ, did I get it right?
Pro-opiomelanocortin neuron.
Bam. Nailed it.
Nice. I should mention that I found a little extra info on the name, since that's just what I'm going to talk about the whole time.
Yeah.
But the old name was the gastric inhibitory polypeptide or peptide, which is probably why that's what we had heard. But they felt like that was describing the function of it incorrectly, because they used to think that it decreased secretion of stomach acid to protect the small intestines from stomach acid and reduce GI motility, which they now attribute more to secretin, which is a hormone we've probably heard of. So since it does what Mike just said, and it is primarily related to insulin secretion, they renamed it glucose-dependent, not renamed it, but a lot of people prefer the name glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide, but kept the abbreviation GIP to prevent confusion, but it may have just created more.
There you go. And so those things I was just referring to is that's the GLP-1 side. So GIP. It's going to have similar effects. So you're going to have increased release of insulin from beta cells whenever you have carbohydrate, in the diet. You consume those, you're going to get that beta cell release of insulin. You're also going to get that beta cell proliferation in order to create more healthy cells. However, one of the things that is different about GIP is that when it's euglycemic environments or even hypoglycemic environments, you actually get an increased release of glucagon, which by itself, especially in a euglycemic environment, by itself is one of the reasons why GIPs as a standalone monotherapy agent haven't come to fruition as of yet. We want to suppress glucagon in a lot of cases with type 2 diabetes, but because this is together, we are offsetting the glucagon activity that the GIP-1 has at euglycemic levels, and then the GLP-1 is suppressing that glucagon so that you're kind of shutting down or at least limiting the effects of glycogenolysis, gluconeogenesis, and if the patient were to have a hypoglycemic event, then that increase in glucagon activity could actually come into play and be a benefit in that case. So that's why the GIP and GLP-1 from a pancreas standpoint seem to be an effective combo. Also, one of the kind of unique things with GIP-1 is GIP, not one. There's no one after it.
With GIP, nothing.
I know, GIP 0. But
it's not even 0.
Okay.
It's just nothing.
Just nothing. Right on. Different than 0. Me and AJ had a whole debate about this. But GIP affects the increase of bone formation and basically can kind of help to store some of that free calcium in the bone itself and actually increase osteoblast activity and decrease osteoclast. And so you actually can get some bone formation, which who knows, maybe we'll end up using this in not just diabetes, but also as a tool towards osteoporosis in the future. AJ, have you seen anything about that?
I have, and that's one of the weird things about these hormones is that they've got a lot of receptors expressed in a lot of different places. And one thing that I think Cole may be excited to hear is that there's expression of receptors in the tongue, as well as the bones and fat cells and different things like that. And so they will increase taste sensitivity as well as increase bone resorption or decrease resorption, increase deposition, as well as fat deposition when you're utilizing that glucose.
That is exciting to me because as we were talking about before the podcast, and I think I've mentioned before, since I had COVID, I had lost my sense of taste. Now it's started to return, but it's extremely blunted. So if I had a way to improve my taste, I would be very appreciative of that.
So just, you never know. Maybe we'll inject you with this stuff
just
to see what happens.
Just give me some GIP.
Maybe.
Just give me some GIP.
So one of the other things that it plays a role in is actually the fat accumulation, which again I think has kind of been one potential limiting factor. AJ, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the limiting factors when you think about it as monotherapy. However, when you add that in with the GLP-1, that can kind of offset that. And as you'll see from the trials, we actually got some solid weight loss data associated with this as well.
Synergistic, almost 11 to 12 kilograms actually over 26 weeks.
Yeah. So it's fantastic. And we'll talk, we'll get into it, but it's great.
Yeah. Also, it's broken down by DPP-4. So just like with the GLP-1, there's no reason to have a DPP-4 inhibitor on top of it because it's going to be there to kind of resist the effects of DPP-4 anyway. And I think it's going to be one of those things that is definitely, because of all the unique mechanisms at play and all that, I think it's going to be a game changer for sure. It also seems to promote like insulin release and kind of the kind of storing of different like insulin precursors as well inside the cell, and yeah, it's something that I think is going to cover as many pathways as we can kind of, or at least that we know of now, from a medication standpoint. I think it's going to cover all of our super important pathways to kind of get us to our end goal with treating diabetes, just type 2 anyway. What I missed with mechanism, AJ? Oh, AJ, tell us about apoptosis or anti-apoptosis.
Anti-apoptosis. So basically, just the cell program death is one thing that the GIPs and GLPs both help stimulate. Is the healthy cleanup and restoration of those cells. A lot of times in type 2 diabetes, we've got downregulation of enzymes and different proteins like arginase 2 that will increase the rate of which these cells are dying, but they don't increase the rate of which they kind of regenerate. And so GIP and GLP-1 also both help the regeneration of those cells.
Yep. So I think this could also slow down the progression if you have a patient where they've been hyperglycemic for a very long time. You're getting beta cell destruction because of just the overactivity and stress, and maybe hopefully this can kind of preserve some of the beta cell function and carry on. Anything else, AJ, that we haven't talked about that I'm missing?
There's very few receptors that are expressed, little to none on the alpha cells, actually. So that's why GLP-1s have little to no effects on glucagon in euvolemic or hypovolemic. Not volemic, euglycemic and hypoglycemic.
I was going to say
glycemic states. Yeah,
right on.
But they are highly expressed in the delta cells, and that's what expresses somatostatin. And somatostatin is a hormone that is highly expressed. The receptors are highly expressed on alpha cells. So that's why you have that that glucagon suppressing effect from GLPs and GIPs.
Heck yeah. And the other thing is going to be curious to see if they can prove that it has the cardiovascular protection as well, like Trulicity did. Man, it's going to be all time for this drug. It's coming. I think so too.
The cardiovascular stuff.
Yeah, they're studying it, so I'm hoping that shows positive results too.
Yeah, and they have some. We'll talk about each one, but like in the Surpass 4 trial when they went up against glargine, they have some mention of cardiovascular safety. But yes, so all these trials are the Surpass trials. A spoiler, we'll get into each one of them. But I think the one that you're mentioning is Surpass CVOT that they're putting up against dulaglutide, which is of course Trulicity. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why my mind just blanked there, but yeah, that's what they're doing, the full cardiovascular safety like they've done with all the rest, and that data should be out in 2024. So we've got a minute to wait. But
that's the cardiovascular data you said?
That's the cardiovascular data. Mm-hmm. And
nice.
So it can be approved before that, but I think we'll get some interesting info.
Yeah, that'll be great. Yeah. So I guess let's just start with at the beginning with the Surpass trials. So Surpass 1, the Tirzepatide is basically dosed at 5, 10, and 15 milligrams. It's given weekly, so that's another bonus for that drug as well. And it was in that particular study, which was published in Lancet, they were looking at the A1C reduction as well as the weight loss throughout a 40-week treatment range. And we saw that the placebo-adjusted A1C reductions during that 40-week treatment range from 1.91% to 2.11%, depending on which dose was used. And the weight reductions range 6.3 to 8.8 kilograms in that study, and up to 92 patients that were in the study achieved an A1C below 7, compared to only 19% of those taking placebo. So it's and actually 52% versus 1% of placebo achieved levels below 5.7%, which is kind of interesting.
It's very interesting. And you'll see that as a trend throughout the rest of the Surpass trials, which I think is interesting that they let them get that low, but then they also reported the adverse events, and for the most part it doesn't seem like hypoglycemia is any higher than the comparator groups either, so very interesting.
And why we both kind of pause, if you haven't heard us talk about like the Accord trial, where they basically compared more strict A1C control to more relaxed. I believe was 6.0 as the target. They got to about 6.4 versus 7.5 or so in the more relaxed group. They ended up having to stop the trial early because increased risk of death from mostly hypoglycemic type events, and in the more controlled arm. And so we've always kind of relaxed A1C goals for most patients, especially type 2 patients that are older. And so the fact that they actually pushed it to below 5.7 to basically normalize A1C again is interesting, and they did it without having the hypoglycemic events that would kind of put the patient at risk. So very interesting.
Yeah,
I think that's attributable to the GIP. So GIP increases that metabolic flexibility, and it also helps stimulate the glucagon at those hypoglycemic events. And so it's beautiful. It's synergistic, and it's just opening up a whole new step into diabetes treatment.
It's beautiful.
I know, it is. Well said, AJ. I like that.
It's beautiful.
It is. No, it's great. I mean, to think if we could take a time machine and show this drug just when they had just the basic Humulin or just basic insulins, or sulfonylureas just came out and we're like, hey, we got these newest and greatest glipizide.
The advancements are amazing because think about how revolutionary insulin was when it came out. Yeah, and now we're like Humulin in, pig insulin or whatever.
Would never.
It's great. It's good. It's really good. So that was Surpass 1. Then there's 4 more. But Surpass 2, I think, is probably one of the most compelling to me, only because it puts Tirzepatide straight up against semaglutide, Ozempic, which is some people's go-to, especially with weight loss in mind. A lot of people like Trulicity too, but they put it up against it, looking at for non-inferiority with A1C and with the weight, and they found non-inferiority and superiority with both. So as far as A1C reduction goes, they got about 2.3 points during the 40-week follow-up, which is kind of what they do with all these trials, in the Tirzepatide group, which was significantly better than the 1.8% point reduction with semaglutide. So that's significant. As far as the weight reduction, they had 5.5 kilograms more with the Tirzepatide group than with semaglutide. And I think the actual full number for Tirzepatide was 11.2 kilograms in the highest dose, in the 15 milligrams, which for those of you who are in America, that's 24 pounds, 25 pounds or something like that.
A lot.
That's a lot versus semaglutide, which we tend to think of as the best for weight reduction.
I mean, it is. It
is the best for weight reduction at 5.7 kilograms. I mean, that's 25% of the 20. Yeah.
It's a
no,
huge
it's not.
reduction.
It's about 50% of the reduction that you see with Tirzepatide.
I stepped in there. That's what I saw.
I.e., Tirzepatide is 100% better. It's twice as good, times 2. As far as weight reduction goes.
It works 100% of the time.
Listen. When I was converting from kilograms to pounds and then back, it was confusing me.
60% of the time, every time. So the other thing is, as far as the dosing schedule, basically the patients, if they were in the Tirzepatide group, they started with 2.5 milligrams once a week for 4 weeks, and then were titrated up 2.5 milligrams at increments every 4 weeks. So it took a little bit to actually get to the higher doses of the Tirzepatide when they went to the 15 milligram. Once the patient was set in a group, so they were at let's say they're at 5 milligram dosing, they didn't increase from there. So they kind of got left in that group.
Interesting.
And then
I wonder how that affects the results. That's fine.
And then the semaglutide group was all 1 milligram, but again, they were started at 0.25.
Right.
Because that was a concern I had. Well, how come we didn't see more GI upset and stuff in the semaglutide group but they weren't just started on 1 milligram. It was the normal titration of Ozempic.
And speaking of which, we should probably mention the adverse effects because they were, I don't know about the significance, I didn't double check, but it looks like it's a little bit higher with the Tirzepatide than with the semaglutide. So the most common are nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, and it looks to be a few percentage points higher with Tirzepatide versus semaglutide. With the hypoglycemia, it was there was a little bit more hypoglycemia with the Tirzepatide group. About at the highest dose, 1.7% of the patients had hypoglycemic events versus 0.4 with the semaglutide. That was at the highest dose. With the lower doses, it was 0.6% with the 5 milligrams, 0.2% with the 10 milligrams. Takeaway point for me, all those percentages are extremely low. So that's good.
Yeah, and I will say, the other thing, and we've mentioned this before, but when it comes to kind of seeing the impact of these medications, it drives me crazy when I hear people say, "Oh, we would only expect to see 1 to 1.5% reduction in A1C with these drugs. So if the person's in A1C is 13, then we really, we need this plus insulin plus blah blah blah." When you take into account the fact that the patient may undergo diabetes education and all that good stuff, obviously we could probably see insane drops in A1C with this drug, and the patients that were studying this group only had an A1C of on average about 8.3. So the fact that we could drop them 2 points is pretty huge.
They weren't that high, and a huge percentage, just like in placebo, were under 7.
Yeah.
Basically, the numbers that you quote from the trials are like if you handed them this drug and they did nothing else but take this drug and keep everything else the same, that's what they'd see. But that's not how it happens.
And so, I think, the side effect wise, maybe a little bit more instance of GI upset and some of those types of adverse effects. But
I don't want to discount that too, because 20% of patients being nauseous, 15% of them having diarrhea. Patients do not like that stuff, right? But if you can warn them about it ahead of time, it's usually helpful.
Yeah.
And if they can push through it and it ends up getting more tolerable as time goes on, it's a great thing to be on.
We have patients that really need to be on a GLP-1, and if the nausea is the main thing, we'll just give them Zofran.
Yeah.
For a week or two, let their bodies adjust and try it, go from there. That usually does the trick.
It's important enough for them to continue on it. So,
for sure. All right. What's next?
So there's Surpass 3 and Surpass 4, which are effectively very similar. Surpass 3 was Tirzepatide in people taking metformin with or without an SGLT2 inhibitor. So these are all these patients are taking metformin. And we should have mentioned that in Surpass 2, they were also taking metformin as well, up against insulins. So
they used degludec too, which is the
ultra long acting, right? So Surpass 3 was degludec, Surpass 4 was glargine. So both compelling. Glargine's obviously the more commonly used one, but degludec is the ultra long acting. And effectively, as far as hypoglycemia events go, of course, they were much lower in the tirzepatide group. As far as weight loss goes, we saw similar significant weight loss, 12.9 kilograms in the Surpass 3, and similar in the Surpass 4 versus a bit of a weight gain with the insulin, like you'd expect, right? A couple of kilograms from there. And they also were, I believe both were superior in A1C reduction.
Yeah.
Is that right? So, yeah.
So the other thing that's interesting too is this study went 52 weeks as opposed to 40 weeks like the prior one, and you can't directly compare it. So I know this is not statistically acceptable from a statistic law standpoint, but I will say that you still numerically got even higher reduction in A1C in the Surpass 3, and is I believe in the Surpass 4 as well. Yeah, in Surpass 4. So basically, my thought is that the longer we stay on these medications, we're going to keep on getting that continued drop in A1C. So when you throw that in there with patients that also have some diet, exercise counseling, and lifestyle change counseling, man, we're going to be in business.
It's really good. And I should mention that Surpass 4, when they put it up against glargine, the other big thing they were looking at was cardiovascular risk. So all the patients in Surpass 4 were at increased cardiovascular risk, and they did do an extended follow-up up to 104 weeks to look for the MACE, the major adverse cardiovascular event rates. And they found a non-inferiority there, so there wasn't like superiority from the tirzepatide, but it at least was not worse than glargine from a cardiovascular perspective. But I think 87% of the patients had previous events, so it was a lot of secondary prevention, very high-risk patients. So, it'd be tough to get a superiority from that.
Well, and you got to think, too, usually those studies are compared to placebo. But
usually
the
they're compared to placebo.
Who are in this group are having their A1C also treated with the insulin, which obviously the lower A1C is going to lead to less cardiovascular events.
Right.
So that may have just offset it with that.
Well, also these patients are on metformin with or without sulfonylurea or SGLT2. So some of them are on SGLT2s, which we would expect to have some cardiovascular benefit from that too. So it's mixed in there. So, but the way this trial is advertised is
in the glargine trial, the Surpass 4 they were on SGLT2 inhibitors.
They could have been on. Not all of them were. It was all metformin with or without sulfonylurea or SGLT2.
Okay, I thought that was the degludec.
That was the glargine. Degludec was metformin with or without SGLT2, but it wasn't people at increased cardiovascular risk, so they didn't do the extension for the cardiovascular portion. Yeah.
With our powers combined, Cole, we make one kind of okay guy.
We make one kind of smart pharmacist.
Sort of like a mediocre at best pharmacist that can read studies that other smart people wrote. Surpass 5.
Surpass 5, yeah.
That's, again, glargine. And this one, they went to 40 weeks, and the total Tirzepatide, again, the drop in A1C was 2.59%. Glargine only had a 0.93%.
Well, so that was placebo. It was up against placebo. So the difference with 5 versus 4.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, with glargine. I can't read my own stinking thing. Right? So
yes.
Tirzepatide plus glargine.
Right. So with 4, they were going up against glargine. So it was basically like patients who have the oral therapies, are kind of maxed out on them or whatever, and we want to add on insulin or Tirzepatide. They didn't really take into account a regular GLP-1 in this instance, but it's like, okay, should we add on glargine? Should we add on Tirzepatide? Tirzepatide seems to be clearly better. With Surpass 5, it's patients who may have been maxed out on oral therapy, maybe not. They didn't really specify, or I'd have to look a little deeper into that, but it's Tirzepatide plus glargine versus placebo. So are we going to see good benefit with it being added to glargine, or is it safe to be added with glargine and be used alongside insulin like we do with GLP-1s a lot of the time versus placebo?
Yep.
And it seems to be, yes.
Thank you. Good save, Cole. I don't know what the heck I was talking about.
Tell you what, with our minds combined.
I can't read words very good, apparently. They also have the Surpass AP combo, which is another versus glargine. This time I'm actually sure it's versus. In patients who are taking one of the two study meds plus metformin with or without a sulfonylurea. I hope that this shows that the sulfonylurea groups had way more adverse effects, not as good outcomes. Maybe the A1C wasn't that different, just so we can finally put the nail in the coffin for sulfonylureas.
Yeah, I don't really know. I guess the only difference between this and Surpass 4 is that it wasn't patients that increased cardiovascular risk and there weren't SGLT2 involved. It's just the sulfonylurea. So they might just be trying to figure out, like, can we say that we shouldn't use this with a sulfonylurea or something, like from a cardiovascular perspective, or is this going to really increase the rates of hypoglycemia when you add on a sulfonylurea, stuff like that? That's the only reason I can think they're doing that versus the ones they've already done. But yeah, I think you can get some good information from that.
You already mentioned the Surpass CVOT. Then that's the one that they are actually comparing against dulaglutide 1.5, because it's the dose that showed to be cardioprotective from the Rewind trial. So this, I'm assuming, would be a non-inferiority. Hopefully they'll try to go for superiority too, because that'd be crazy. Because the Rewind study is definitely impressive compared to some of the other studies. So if they can show this one's even better.
Those are all against placebo, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
That's wild, yeah.
So this one's stepping it up.
So with the amount of trials they're doing, I'm surprised they didn't do one against placebo and then go for dulaglutide. But they really must be confident.
I think the early studies were placebo. A little cocky.
Oh, like phase 1, phase 2?
Yeah, I think they were.
Phase 2.
And I think, AJ, wasn't there a initial placebo versus placebo before the Surpass trial? Or am I making that up?
There was, and then there was one after that was the Surmount trial.
Okay.
And here's a thought too. They might be saying, if we can get it non-inferiority to dulaglutide, then we're saying that means it has the benefit that dulaglutide has. You know what I'm saying? So that's probably their thought process.
Yeah, which is fine. I would take that.
And then if it's better, so yeah, I guess it's a win-win. Because then if it's the only way they could lose is if dulaglutide is better, which I guess is a risk. But then if it's better, then it's like using Tirzepatide.
I would say I don't know how it could be. You're still getting
unless there's something going on with GIP that might have some pleiotropic effect that we're not aware of or something.
Yeah, which I'm pretty sure that the effects on the heart aren't anything I'm worried about.
Chronotropic. GIP is chronotropic, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
So I guess it has some effect on the heart.
Okay. Thank you, AJ.
Heart rate.
I'm just getting messing up all over the place tonight. I'm gonna have to just call it a day and just retire from podcasting.
That's what happens when we have two of us in here, huh?
Yeah, I guess. They also have a Japanese study that is it was estimated to be completed in April of 2021. I guess they've extended that, or at least the data hasn't been published officially that I could see. But it was compared. Tirzepatide was compared to dulaglutide 0.75 milligrams in people taking no other glucose-lowering medications. So that'll be interesting to see. I don't know why they wouldn't have increased to the 1.5, the dulaglutide. That seems a little weird. But yeah, so that's in that Surpass J Mono. I like how the Japanese market did J Mono. That sounds like their rapper name. I like that.
Yeah, that would be a good rapper name.
And then Surpass J combo, I get it, another study in the Japanese population where they compared it to Tirzepatide 2 non-incretin-based anti-diabetic medications over a 52-week period. So it's definitely, they're looking at it from all kinds of different angles. So I like that.
Yeah, the last big one that I think will be very interesting will be the Surmount trials, which was there's only one right now that's still got a few years left, but it's the Surmount 1 trial, and it's looking specifically at Tirzepatide for obesity, patients who have diabetes and they're obese, and so it's kind of mimicking they had an Ozempic trial that was just weight based, right? I thought they did, and that's how they got the other brand name approved. Anyways,
yeah,
so
Wegovy.
Yes, so they're not looking at any different dosing. It's still the 5, 10, and 15 milligrams, but it's just looking specifically at body weight, and it's a 72-week follow-up. So I think they're going to see some banging results from that, I'd imagine.
Yep. The other thing that's kind of interesting too is they. Not only are they having all these different studies, but if you want a very kind of concise and all put together summary of all of these studies, if you check out the website diabetes.medicineMatters.com/Tirzepatide, they have some pretty good summary slides summary listed out of all these different drugs, and they have a little area at the bottom where you can put in your email address. I don't know these people, so I'm assuming they're not going to spam me like crazy, but no guarantees. You basically say if you're a healthcare professional, you give them your email address, and they will send you updates as new studies come out and new information about the studies get released. So it's from Springer Healthcare Limited, whoever that is. So I say that based on zero research and how good this place is, and you may get a bunch of spam emails. So my bad.
Well, I looked at the actual trials and compared them a little bit to what they said. It looked good, so I think they're
it seems legit.
Seems legit.
They also have a lot of other journal club summary things. If you're into that kind of thing, definitely check that out. It's a cool website. I'm subscribing myself, so I'll let you guys know about the spam. Just did it right now on the air, so you guys can feel like you're a part of it.
I've got too much spam, and I'm like, I need to unsubscribe for some of this stuff, but I just delete because I don't have time.
I don't even delete. I have 10,000 emails on my phone.
I used to, and then I made the switch, and I went through with all my email accounts, and there's some ways where you can just mark all as read, like all in history as read, and after I did that, I now have 0 unread emails.
But what if you didn't read them and you missed something vital?
But you're not going to go back 3 years and look at the 10,000 unread emails, right? So I open everything. Okay. Well, not open. I don't open everything. If I know I don't need it, swipe, delete. But
right on.
I don't leave anything on unread. If I need it, I will flag it.
Yeah, I had to create a folder called important stuff, and that's where I throw all my drug stuff that I don't have time to read at that moment, because otherwise I'll forget.
And my work email, I've started to not keep anything in my inbox at all. It all goes to different folders. I have one folder that's like, this is important stuff or whatever, but I don't want it in my inbox.
I should check my work email every once in a while. I'm just kidding. That's a joke. Anybody from work listening? AJ, what else we got for this?
I think the biggest thing to think about is providers and the adverse effects. It's never you can't increase that titration too slowly. Even at the starter dose of 1 milligram, you're seeing equivalent lowering of A1C and body weight with semaglutide 1 milligram. And so from that point on, if you want these patients to stay adherent, understanding that this dual receptor agonist is going to be almost twice as strong, you're going to see, an increased, what do you call it?
Adherent, yeah. You're going to see an increase in here. So start them low and give them some time on it.
Well, did they start at 1 I was thinking they started at 2.5.
Oh, it's 2.5?
2.5 and then titrated up from there based on 2.5 increments. Am I making that up?
1, 2.5, 5, 10, and 15.
Okay. Right
on. So that's quite the titration versus the other GLP ones, huh?
The only one that I actually read in detail was the Surpass 2. And then I was like, there's too many of these Surpass trials. So
2 is probably...
Summary it is.
2 was the most compelling to me.
That's why I picked that one.
Yeah.
Still a phase 3. We'll see what they actually come out with.
Yeah.
It's definitely... I would be very shocked if this isn't approved this year. And then the question's obviously going to be the price and all that. Hopefully they'll make it...
it was...
comparable to GLP-1s.
The problem is, it depends. I'm sure they'll do it strategically, of course, but it'll probably come out in September, October, and then get added on to formularies by January. and you may even have to try. Who knows? You might have to try a GLP-1 for the insurance to cover it. Which would be
a huge pain in the butt. And if you
but hopefully they put it in the same place as GLP-1s on formularies.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
That's why if Lilly does it right, and they price it the same, gosh, that'd be so nice. Because then it's a no-brainer.
I think they will. I mean, it seems like all these injectables are priced around the same. It's, $700 to $1,200 for a month's supply, and from an insurance perspective. So yeah, I think they do.
It's a lot cheaper than negative outcomes.
Yes, it is.
Long term.
Hospitalizations.
Not
surgeries.
Cheap.
They're not cheap.
New pancreas, not cheap at all.
No.
All right, so make sure you check that stuff out. If you want more information, there's plenty available. A lot of these studies are from New England Journal of Medicine that have like some summary videos you can watch, all kinds of good stuff. So definitely make sure you check that out, and check out that website that I mentioned earlier if you want to subscribe and get some updates from them. And other than that, I really appreciate the comments and some of the ratings we've gotten on iTunes and Spotify. I actually didn't realize Spotify had ratings, but we were 4.9 on Spotify too. So
I didn't know they had ratings.
Thank you guys for that. That is awesome. We went back up from a 4.8 to a 4.9 on iTunes, so we're making up for those people who said we sound terrible.
Yeah, 4.8 is unacceptable.
Yeah, I was really disappointed. Plus, I got my feelings hurt by saying my voice sucked, but that's okay. I'll get over it. And if you guys have any questions, concerns, comments, instead of leaving us a hurtful comment, maybe just send us an email and tell us we sound bad, and then I'll be like, all right, I'll try to work on it. And now, if you guys actually have questions or anything, definitely reach out. If I haven't responded or calls and responded, we promise you we're not trying to ignore you. We do end up getting quite a few messages nowadays, so not to sound like anything, but we just, time's sake, it's a little tough sometimes. We will do our absolute best to get back to you. And if you want to send us a text directly, 415-943-6116, and we will do our best to answer you on whichever method of communication you prefer. Check out Patreon. The link's in the show notes. It's got our lecture style lectures on there with PowerPoint slides and all that. And I'm going to go through and actually update like the playlist so you can kind of click at the top there and know exactly which disease state or area of those topics are in. So I got to do that. It's something I'm going to work on. And also PA school is back in session, so that means Patreon lectures are going to be no choice but full swing, because that's I have to get the lecture anyway, so might as well practice early and record them. So anyways, without further ado, thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time. Have a good one.